It was 5 years ago today that 12 jurors unanimously acquitted Michael Jackson on various charges of child molestation, conspiracy, and providing alcohol to a minor. It is difficult to know how history will remember the Michael Jackson trial. Perhaps as the epitome of Western celebrity obsession. Perhaps as a 21st century lynching. Personally, I think it'll be remembered as one of the most shameful episodes in journalistic history. It's not until you find yourself digging through newspaper archives and rewatching hours of TV coverage that you truly understand the magnitude of the media's failings. It was industry-wide. No doubt, there were certain reporters and even publications and TV stations that overtly favoured the prosecution. But many of the media's shortcomings were institutional. In a media obsessed with sound bites, how do you reduce 8 hours of testimony into 2 sentences and remain accurate? In an era of rolling news and instant blogging, how do you resist the temptation to dash out of the courtroom at the earliest convenience to break the news of the latest salacious allegations, even if it means missing a slice of the day's testimony? Looking back on the Michael Jackson trial, I see a media out of control. The sheer amount of propaganda, bias, distortion, and disinformation is almost beyond comprehension. Reading the court transcripts and comparing them to the newspaper cuttings, the trial that was relayed to us didn't even resemble the trial that was going on inside the courtroom. The transcripts show an endless parade of seedy prosecution witnesses perjuring themselves on an almost hourly basis and crumbling under cross-examination. The newspaper cuttings and TV news clips detail day after day of heinous accusations and lurid innuendo. It was November 18th, 2003, when 70 sheriffs swooped on Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch. As soon as the news of the raid broke, news channels abandoned their schedules and switched to 24-hour coverage. When it emerged that Jackson was accused of molesting young cancer survivor Gavin Arvizo, the boy who famously held the singer's hand in Martin Bashir's Living with Michael Jackson documentary, the media went into overdrive. Networks were so obsessed by the Jackson scandal that a terrorist attack in Turkey went almost entirely unreported, with only CNN bothering to broadcast George Bush and Tony Blair's joint press conference about the disaster. All 3 major networks immediately set about producing hour-long specials on the Jackson case, apparently undeterred by the fact that nothing was yet known about the allegations and prosecutors weren't answering questions. CBS dedicated an episode of 48 Hours Investigates to the arrest, while NBC's Dateline and ABC's 2020 also rushed out Jackson specials. Within 2 days of the Neverland raid, and before Jackson had even been arrested, VH1 announced a half-hour documentary called Michael Jackson Sex Scandal. Daily Variety described the Jackson story as a godsend for media outlets, particularly cable news channels and local stations looking to pump up Nielsen numbers in the final week of the all-important November sweeps. Daily Variety was right. Celebrity-oriented news shows saw figures spike when the Jackson story hit. Viewing figures for Access Hollywood were up 10% on the previous week. Entertainment Tonight and Extra both achieved season best audience numbers, and Celebrity Justice also enjoyed an 8% rise. Newspapers reacted just as hysterically as TV stations. "Sicko," shrieked the New York Daily News. "Jacko, now get out of this one," goaded the New York Post. The Sun, Britain's largest newspaper, ran an article titled, "He's bad, he's dangerous, he's history." The piece branded Jackson an ex-black, ex-superstar, a freak, and a twisted individual, and called for his children to be taken into care. If he weren't a pop idol with piles of cash to hide behind, it said, he would have been picked up years ago. Encouraged by the audience boost the Jackson scandal had produced, media outlets made it their mission to milk the case for all they could. Entertainment Weekly's Tom Sinclair wrote, "Media mavens, from the tackiest tabloid reporter to the nattiest network news anchor, are in overdrive scrambling to fill column inches and airtime with Jacko scoops and talking heads." Pressure on news people is enormous, attorney Harlan Braun told Sinclair. So lawyers you've never heard of wind up on television talking about cases they have no connection to. And it's not just lawyers. Everyone from doctors, writers and psychiatrists to convenience store clerks who once waited on Jackson are weighing in on TV and in print. While the media was busy badgering a host of quacks and distant acquaintances for their views on the scandal, the team of prosecutors behind the latest Jackson case were engaged in some highly questionable behaviour, but the media didn't seem to care. During the Neverland raid, District Attorney Tom Sneddon The prosecutor who unsuccessfully pursued Jackson in 1993 and his officers breached the term of their own search warrant, seizing hordes of irrelevant business papers.
They locked everybody out of the house. They had the whole house to themselves to do whatever they wanted. And they totally took advantage. They went into areas they weren't supposed to go into, like my office. They didn't have search warrants for those places, and they totally took advantage.
They also illegally raided the office of a PI working for Jackson's defence team and lifted defence documents from the home of the singer's personal assistant. Sneddon also appeared to be tampering with fundamental elements of his case whenever evidence came to light which undermined the Arvizo family's claims. For instance, when the DA found out about 2 taped interviews in which the entire Arvizo family sang Jackson's praises and denied any abuse, he introduced the conspiracy charge and claimed that they'd been forced to lie against their will.
He plays with them, laughs with them. He lets them win.
In a similar instance, Jackson's lawyer Mark Garagos appeared on NBC in January 2004 and announced that the singer had a concrete, ironclad alibi for the dates on the charge sheet. By the time Jackson was rearraigned in April for the conspiracy charge, the molestation dates on the rap sheet had been shifted by almost 2 weeks. Sneddon was later caught seemingly trying to plant fingerprint evidence against Jackson, allowing accuser Gavin Arvizo to handle adult magazines during grand jury hearings, then bagging them up and sending them away for fingerprint analysis. Not only did the majority of the media overlook this flurry of questionable and occasionally illegal activity on the part of the prosecution, it also seemed perfectly content to perpetuate damning propaganda on the prosecution's behalf, despite a complete lack of corroborative evidence. For example, Diane Diamond appeared on Larry King Live days after Jackson's arrest and spoke repeatedly about a stack of love letters the star had supposedly written to Gavin Arvizo. "Does anyone here know of the existence of these letters?" asked King. "Absolutely," Diamond replied. "I do. I absolutely know of their existence." "Diane, have you read them?" "No, I've not read them." Diamond admitted that she'd never even seen the letters, let alone read them, but said she knew about them from high law enforcement sources. But those love letters never materialised. When Diamond said she absolutely knew of their existence, she was basing her comments solely on the words of police sources. At best, the police sources were parroting the Arvizo's allegations in good faith. At worst, they'd concocted the story themselves to sully Jackson's name. Either way, the story went around the world with not a shed of evidence to support it. It was over a year between Jackson's arrest and the beginning of his trial, and the media was forced to try and pad out the story for as long as they could in the interim. Aware that Jackson was bound by a gag order, and therefore powerless to respond, prosecution sympathisers started leaking documents such as Jordan Chandler's 1993 police statement. The media, hungry for scandal and sensationalism, pounced on them. At the same time, allegations sold to tabloid TV shows by disgruntled ex-employees in the 1990s were constantly rehashed and presented as news. Small details of the Arvizo family's allegations would also periodically leak. While most media outlets reported these stories as allegations rather than fact, the sheer amount and frequency of stories connecting Jackson to ugly sexual abuse, coupled with his inability to refute them, had a devastating effect on the star's public image.